right? Nobody gets up in the morning and decides to be a micromanager. I think stop talking about culture, be the culture. Forget what you're saying in the town halls. People watch your actions. Reality is reality. So reality doesn't go away just because you ignore it. It's not brutal honesty without relationship. It's building the depth of relationship that this honesty is possible. And now I recently wrote an article about what I call Santa Claus leadership.
Okay.
Giving people appreciation that they haven't yet earned. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional.
Welcome back to our podcast, Culture and Coffee, where we are deep diving into corporate culture, into leadership, and how to understand a little bit how to modify or challenge behaviors in order to drive high performance in an organization. We have had many leaders that help us understand a little bit how they are doing that in their own organization. But today we have the privilege to host one incredible guest that is seeing a lot of different companies and is supporting those kind of companies being able to drive their cultural journey or at least build some cultural transformation. He's a psychologist by education, but has also found his own company in order to support then those cultural change. Then my pleasure is to welcome Joachim Stempfle. Welcome to Culture and Coffee.
Thank you so much.
And I will just start with the regular question is, how do you like your coffee in the morning or actually at any time of the day? Is it kind of an energy booster or like a moment of calm in order to recover for some of the intense meeting you had before?
It's a great question, and it depends. Sometimes black, sometimes I love a cappuccino. I like variety, and it depends exactly what you said. What do you need on this morning?
Well, diversity. It's already a good, a good intro into the topic of culture.
Yes.
Maybe, we will quickly deep dive into the topic, but maybe I would be interested that you can introduce yourself because you are a psychologist studying, obviously, mindset, human mindset, and how behaviors have been shaped in one or the other way.
Yeah. So first of all, a big thank you for this invitation. Usually I'm on the other side. I interview leaders and now a CEO is interviewing me. That's a first for me, but it shows your passion for the topic and your understanding of the importance of the human dimension to success and to an evolution of a business. My background as a psychologist was a bit of an accident, I would say, right? Because I did all kinds of different things. In my early youth, I worked in different organizations trying to make money. I saw the inside of companies more bottom up, and I saw some also not so good things, Taylorism in action, right? Very heavy process management, leaders who were not always very caring and also not very visionary. So my immediate inclination wasn't to go into business. My first experiences were quite boring, and I had more of a creative streak. I played music, I wrote software, I wrote games, I did those kind of things. But then I studied psychology because I was very interested in the human mind. How do humans deal with reality and with complexity with other human beings? I still think it's the most fascinating topic ever, right? Because you have all those dimensions of complexity. And I realized organizations actually provide a very rich environment to first understand that, but then also to influence that, right? Because I think as a CEO, the difference it makes, whether somebody's running on fear or whether somebody's running on positive energy and vision is massive when you look at both the impact on the people and the business. And how do we orchestrate those conditions, right? Where people can do their best work and where the business thrives. That has been my passion. Okay,
but then interesting to see that you have done some, let's say, groundwork before getting into this. What have been the aha moment that when you have seen the let's say the psychological principles that you have been able to say, this is explaining this kind of behavior, or this is fear, this is energy. but is there any kind of basic principles that we should be aware of for everyone listening that
Yes.
have not done any of the psychological study, but
Yes.
having 2 or 3 things that you can say,
Yes.
those are the things I want to learn a little bit more about?
Yes. I think a very basic understanding of how the human mind works is very powerful. Nobody gets up in the morning and decides to be a micromanager, but people end up acting like micromanagers because they're stressed, they're under pressure, and then they respond in ways that are not productive. But then you have another system, which is more the creative system. You see it in children, right? Children, when they are safe, they explore. They want to conquer the world. This is our human ingenuity, right? This is our ability to build things. This is at the background of all the businesses. And then you have a third system, which is more about social interaction. But again, this system is very interesting to understand because it can be either we have nurturing relationships where we challenge each other and we support each other and then everybody grows, or it can be I need to fit in, I need to get along, I need to go along to get along. And then I'm losing my identity in that social environment. So I think understanding those systems, the threat system, how do people respond to threat, the creative system, the social system, right? The connection system, that's basic human psychology. And then our ability as humans to rise above the biology, which animals don't have. We are not forced to seek for pleasure and avoid pain. An animal has to do that. They have no choice, but we as human beings are capable to reflect. We can step back. We can look at ourselves in the context. We can look at our reactions, our response patterns, and then we can
response to what we have been used to call the amygdala hijacked, which
that's exactly it.
That's, I think, a concept that in a lot of this managing by fear is the immediate reaction with no control, right?
That's exactly it, right? And the amygdala hijack, biologically, it literally shuts off your prefrontal cortex. So you're literally only using 20% of your brain power, right?
Okay.
And you're going back to immediately learned reactions. So this is important to understand, I think, for anybody working in business, but in any environment, which environments are you creating for people?
Then that's, I think there are so many areas that we can explore from this, but it's really interesting to already, bring those 3 different dimensions. And through, let's say, getting your education as a psychologist, you also decided to start a business to apply this then in a business context. And you founded Atrain, which is in 2003 a consulting company to support organizations, then building up a better culture, or at least a striving culture, and supporting leaders in driving the right behaviors on their own side. It's great to create a company, and very often you start to see that applying it by yourself in your own environment is not so easy. What has been your experience in applying your own concept in your own organization? What has been easy and what has been more challenging than planned then finally?
It's a great question, Guillaume, because if you build your own company, you are always challenged to the core, right? Both on the strategic level, but also on the very personal level. So I would say I probably made every mistake that possible, right? From a leadership point of view. And that is the best way to learn, right? And this gives me the depth to be able to empathize with people who are going through similar things. So for example, when we built the business, we had a very caring culture from the beginning, right? We had a very open culture and a very empathetic culture. But I personally also learned, the difference between caring and then over caring. Initially I was probably over empathetic and I let people get away with things, which is not a good thing, right? And now I recently wrote an article about what I call Santa Claus leadership, giving people appreciation that they haven't yet earned. Giving people rewards that they haven't yet earned legitimately. And if you're doing that, you're creating a level of entitlement and you're basically shielding people from challenge that you shouldn't. They should struggle. They should be able to struggle, and you should provide that container. And in building a business, that's one of the learnings I had, right? Say, hey, we can care and we should care about people. I come more from a psychology background, but that doesn't mean you provide a safety net to the extent that people don't struggle anymore. They need to own their own stuff, right? And so scaling a business, you have a lot of those moments where, you're really challenged first yourself And then you're challenged how you lead the organization and the decisions you make. And I think you probably have very many of the same.
How do you become a caring challenger, being able to challenge but care? How do we do that in practice? How do you support leader being able to get to that level? Is there any kind of things we can learn today that would be, wow, I will implement that tomorrow?
There is. And then I would like to also touch on your second question of the hierarchy that also comes into play. So how do we get to this level of caring challenge, right? Essentially, the question is, how do we build a level of psychological safety among people that we can be radically honest with each other without fundamentally damaging relationships, right? That's what people are afraid, that if we are honest, if I challenge you on your business, or if I point out something, if I give you feedback on something, this will destroy the relationship. So most people then don't do it. So how do we develop this level of psychological safety, right? And this is the technical term, psychological safety, which basically is defined as how much are people willing to take risk in a conversation? How far are people willing to go, and how safe is it to go this far? And I guess the key is to start with relationships first. And, to start building deeper connections between people so they understand each other on a human level. We often do things like have people share some life experiences. What was your most challenging life experience? What was the key success? What has shaped you, right? And then we look at our patterns. What's my pattern, my personal pattern when I'm confronted with attention? Right? What was my family pattern to deal with conflict? What's my pattern to deal with conflict? And then you can say, now, how does that show up in our interactions as a team? Right? You can look at past examples, and when we had a difficult topic, did we see any of those patterns show up? Did I show my avoidance pattern? Right? Or did I just go into problem-solving mode? And how did that impact our interaction? So if you go to this kind of level and you normalize this, we're human beings. We're not machines. We have our vulnerabilities. We have our emotions. We get triggered. So I always bring also a sense of humor to those elements, so that you don't make it just a big drama. This is real life. We all, sometimes we have great moments and sometimes we have super shitty moments. You can even have funny conversations about your shittiest moments in a team, right?
Especially when it's past.
Especially when it's past. But I would always recommend do this before you go into the heavy content discussion. Don't start straight into the tension topic when people go in cold. It's not going to, we were not going to get this far. So that would be probably the psychological safety piece. And to your other point, I think, and I'm curious to learn from you, right, as a CEO, how do you maintain those deep relationships and caring and challenging relationships, but you're still not one of them? You cannot be, right, in your role. You still need to maintain a level of authority that you are the ultimate decision maker. And that's another tension for people to understand that they can have a deep and caring relationship with you, but there's no free ride. There's no free lunch. There can't be.
Exactly.
Right. So how do you deal with that? I'm very curious, right, with exactly that challenge.
Yeah, I think the very first thing that I expressed when I took any leadership role, actually, after having done some experience, was really clearly expressing the rules of working, saying that the door is always open and discussions are more than welcome. There is a saying all truths are not good to be told sometimes. And I remember having read an interesting the document, which is available for everyone that want to look at, is the Netflix culture book. And they have one of the first or second point is brutal honesty, which is a bit to fight against these sugar-coated messages that are ruining a lot of those leadership approach. But how do you think about brutal honesty? And is there maybe one way in the middle, or is the brutal honesty at the end is the only way for leaders to understand that they really have to speak their mind?
Yeah, I think, it's a great question. And in some ways, it's maybe also the wrong question. And I will explain why.
Okay.
Because, we're talking about two different dimensions. One is the level of the quality of the relationship and how much that relationship can bear. And the other one is the level of truth in the conversation, right? These are two different things. And we often trade off one for the other. So we trade off the truth for relationships. But if you do that, you're on a very dangerous path, because reality is reality. So reality doesn't go away just because you ignore it. And when I work with leadership teams, many times, I have to challenge them to say, what is simply true for you to accept because it exists, not because you like it. You might want to have it differently. Now you have geopolitical challenges, right? Now you have tariffs. Now you have Swiss franc, all of that stuff. You hate all of that. I understand that, but you have to deal with it by your responsibility. And if we're not having that open conversation about what's really going on and what we really need to address, then reality will kick you in the ass, right? So reality doesn't change just because you ignore it. And so, we're not doing ourselves a service if we're not having the honest conversation. Similarly, if somebody leads their teams in a way that drives the team into the wall and you have loads of people leaving, if you're not telling this person the truth about what you see about their leadership, it's almost like you open eyes, let them run into a wall. It's not an act of care, right? An act of care would be to say, look, if you continue on like this, you're in trouble, right? And how do we deepen the relationship to the degree that it can deal with this honesty? That's the key, right? It's not brutal honesty without relationship. It's building the depth of relationship that this honesty is possible. And that's an act of care in that sense. And one angle I like to bring in, it might sound a bit esoteric, but it's not. It's Buddhist philosophy. Buddhist philosophy has a very clear way of looking at life, right? The first law, in a way, is the law of impermanence. Nothing on this earth stays the same. Everything changes, but our brain likes to maintain stability. We like to hang on to things. We like to build castles, but all of those castles are changing, right? So then in life, according to Buddhist philosophy, pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Right? You have happy moments, you have successes. Sometimes you get kicked in the ass. There is pain, right? There's difficulty, part of life. What suffering means is if you ignore reality. So if you get attached to things that don't exist anymore, you're operating on delusion. You're building things the way you like them as opposed to how they really are. Then you create suffering because the more you ignore, the more you attach, the more you defend, the more energy it takes to uphold all of that mental construct, all of that charade, right? This takes a lot of energy. So the dishonesty you see in some teams creates huge amounts of negative energy because people have nowhere to go with the truth. So if you look at it like this, it's actually not brutal honesty without relationship. That would be the wrong way, but it's also not a middle way. How much honesty can a conversation bear? My take would be work so strongly on the relationship and on the self-awareness first that you can speak about the truth fully, because otherwise you will have one issue or the other.
How do we help in our culture people to be on the player side? That means taking ownership of the situation versus the victim side, being able to blame the environment and that, putting your head in the sand and saying, I wait that all those things are going away and afterwards we will be able to perform. But really, it's clear that nothing is going to go away and the next wave will come and so on. And the capability for an organization to be resilient. And I think the resilience has been a big topic. And how do you bring resilience and energy in an organization where you have that impression that it's more the macro which is driving the state of emotions in your organization much more than what you are doing yourself. Then it's a lot about taking ownership, about driving the dreaming state, the can-do attitude. And as soon as you start to dream and explore, you start to realize, finally, there are a lot of options possible, but I need to get outside of the hole we can potentially, deep for us.
That's it.
How, but what are the mental model that we have to really leverage to be able to do that, with all our teams or in the different organizations? Because we have looked a lot into helping them to think this way. But I think it would be interesting to put some emotions also behind it, like fears or, what is I would say the positive state versus fears? You would say, trust or self-confidence, or how would you say that? And how do we develop this actually?
You had a super powerful word. It is confidence, and on all different dimensions. It's confidence in ourselves, right? In myself, in my capabilities. It's confidence in each other as a team. And it's confidence in our capabilities as an organization that we can deal with things, but more importantly, that we can shape, right? Not just respond, not just react, we can shape. And in fact, times of uncertainty, it's much easier to really disrupt and drive change. That's the paradox. It drives people into the fear space, but you can drive a lot more innovation in times of uncertainty than in times of stability, because all your competitors are maybe caught in fear spirals. So now is the time to, but from an emotional point of view, I love that you're going there, because it does require a few different things. And often we tend to be too fast. We want to have people immediately on the positive, and it doesn't work that way. For example, I worked with an automotive company some time ago, and they have tough shifts, right? That the reality, the shift from a combustion engine to EVs, right? All of that, the regulatory environment, the deglobalization, it's a difficult environment, and I had people really struggling with that. And there was a lot of emotions and a lot of complaining and a lot of frustration. So at one point, I did an activity, and I'll explain why, where I asked them to write on one side of the flip chart, what are the things that are frustrating you the most about this reality, right? Put a post-it on the left side. And then on the right side, how would you like it instead? How would you like it to be? So they put another post-it. Then I walked up to the flip chart. I took all the post-its on the right side. I crumbled them up, threw them in the corner, and said, this is irrelevant. Doesn't exist. This is reality. Right? This is what you have. This is, and what's behind that is a concept that is called in psychology radical acceptance of reality. You need to accept what is before you can act meaningly. While you are still in denial, while you are still stuck in, why me? Why do I have to deal with this? It was so different 3 years ago. While you are stuck,
denial, going through after the denial process.
All of your energy goes into, in a way, your own situation, and your own. And in psychology, it's also called state orientation. You're not focused on action; you're focused on your mental state, because you're trapped in these loops of why me and why this and all of that. So you have to get to a point of saying, this is a fact, this is reality, this is our responsibility to deal with it. Then the next step, and it's processing the emotions, the loss, the anger, right? Sometimes the fear. And then you go into, and like what we did in the SLC, right? In your session at one point. So when in the past were we able to deal with these kind of things? So you activate your strength, you activate your true power. We are human beings. We are capable of dealing with things, right? We are made for uncertainty. We're not made for stability. We can deal with things. So you step into your strength and into your power. This is where the confidence comes. And from there, you can go and say, now, if we dream, what would be possible and how do we really move, right? And then you move into more of an action, but it's not a defensive action. It's a meaningful action towards a goal, right? That's the difference. People are always active under stress, a lot of busyness, but a reactive defensive action. How do I survive? And if we go through more this process, accepting reality, processing emotions, then really setting a vision, and then working towards that vision very deliberately, then we're channeling into meaningful action, right? Not this defensive action.
I think it's a really interesting, and to unpack what you just said, it's just like very often as leaders, and I can really see myself into this as well, we want to quickly go in the action mode, because this is where we feel the confidence and the more being on the comfort zone than dealing with our own emotions and accepting the reality. Then you are saying that all the transformation steps are about dealing with those reality, being able to accept those emotions and put that on the in the trash, in order that we can really move with accepting where we are and being able to design the future. In all those different steps, with all the different projects you have supported, where the companies are facing the biggest obstacles in all those 3 or 4 different steps we discussed?
I think you were very thoughtful, honestly, by putting the emotions at the forefront here, because most leaders don't like emotions. Many of them have own personal patterns from the family environment that, emotions are not a good thing. And, you need to function, you need to be always in control, right? So emotions are a distraction. So they don't want to open that space at all for the emotions. And they want to push people straight into the action, into the positive. And then obviously it doesn't work because it's fake, right? So people we haven't processed reality yet. And that, from my point of view, is probably the biggest challenge, that we are not willing to go through the steps. You know, I sometimes draw a chart on a flip chart with teams that are like this. They want to go straight to the solution. You know, why would we just do this? And you know, it's not going to work. So I draw a chart, and it's like you have a group of people standing, and there is a valley. Right?
Yeah, that's.
And people don't want to go into the valley. They just want to jump straight over. And you can't jump straight over. You have to have the depth of emotional processing and the depth of analysis to understand what's truly going on before you can act meaningfully. So, you know, how do you embrace, is it a bit slow down to go fast? You know, also the understanding. Have we challenged enough? Have we gotten to the core of what it really is that we're dealing with? Or have we just have a superficial understanding and we do a quick action and then we realize tomorrow it goes nowhere, right? So I think there is an impatience that is often in itself a defensive pattern, that leaders get scared that their organization will fail, which I understand from an empathy point of view. They don't
and that you have the sense of urgency that you need to move and get things done. Move,
and you translate your own sense of urgency into frantic action. And I have to say the biggest danger in this time for leaders is busyness, and you know, busyness in the sense of, and it's paradox, because this kind of business that out of your drive for urgency, you basically drive everybody else to urgent action. You feel like you're doing something, but you're actually avoiding the real strategic questions. So this is a paradox, that this kind of busyness, it looks busy on the outside, but it's leadership avoidance. It's leadership passivity in nature.
That's a very important point.
Because you're busy just solving all these irrelevant firefighting things. And you're not asking the fundamental questions of where you might need to pivot strategically, what are difficult topics you might need to address. But you're keeping your mind busy with all this stuff, and it feels like you're moving, and in fact, you're moving nowhere. You know?
We have discussed a lot what I like about how to be intentional with culture, and how leaders can show up, you know, dealing with their own emotions, being able to manage the empathetic side with also being very clear about what they expect, and this honesty into this. Now, I think by experience, and I'm really curious about what you have witnessed in your different activities. We know that what leaders don't do is very often more powerful or more meaningful for people around than what they actually do. And this is all those hidden messages that are sent unconsciously that are really impacting how people are perceiving really what is the culture or how we are doing about this. Do you have any example of things that leaders should pay attention to, things that are done unconsciously, or you have seen some example that are really somewhat told the opposite of what they were wanting to express?
It's often, I mean, what's described as culture is not culture. This is simply a philosophical statement of how we would like to be, right? And then there is a second element, which is often, I call it the shadow, right? The shadow is everything we don't want to acknowledge about ourselves as an individual, right? We have our projected image of who we want to be, right? And how we want to project ourselves.
And our dark side.
And then there is the dark side of all the shit that's going on, right? And we don't
I
want
wish
to
I did not have one, but we all have one, then we have to recognize
That's it. My wife calls it out to me every day, and I'm sure you have those people also, right? So we have those parts. And I guess if really doing culture work means being very explicit and deliberate about what we want to achieve, but also working with those trade-offs and those tensions, right? So we want to be courageous, but how are we dealing with failure, right? Do we have a way to speak about failure? Those kind of things. And for leaders, I think stop talking about culture, be the culture.
Okay.
You know, show the behaviors. What you said, the things that are not spoken, for a senior leader, and I have to do this work with a lot of seniors, say, you know, forget what you're saying in the town halls. People watch your actions. Right? Yeah. Your real statement.
It's not about the town hall. It's actually about all the other days where there is no town hall.
That's it. So, for example, if you're saying we should really develop talent, and developing talent is a key piece, and you spend 0 of your time with any of your talents in your organization as a senior leader, the message is super clear. Right? You can have on your culture statement whatever you want, but people clearly understand this is how my senior leadership team acts. This is what is needed, right? So if you really look at how culture is conveyed, it's the behavior of senior people, right? It's who gets promoted, who gets fired, right? And it's incentives, it's those things, and it's the rituals, right? What are we spending time on? A lot of organizations will say, yeah, the human side is super important, but when the going gets tough, we cancel all the team development processes, and now we only have the business reviews. Just let's be honest and let's synchronize the actions with with the intention. And then you get to a real cultural movement. And the other myth often is culture change takes forever. Completely untrue. If you have a leader who is absolutely strong conviction, starts to work with his leadership team, you have the kind of behavioral discussions and they translate it into their behavior, and then they cascade that to their leadership teams. Bang. And you've done some of that, right?
Well, that's a very powerful statement that I want to just call it out. Yes, many people think that cultural change takes a lot of time. But I think the reality, and I'm sure everyone can relate to this, when in a country does not work, you change the leader because it was not really happening the way you were wanting, and you can see, different behaviors very quickly. And it's, I think one of the questions is that cultural change does not need potentially so much time, but it's the consistency of it.
Yes.
Which is then becoming a challenge, because when you do that change, how do you make sure that it's not by compliance that people are changing behaviors, which is very happening at the first stage, but it's how do you create commitment to culture? And that's something that I'm interested at which moment or what is needed to move when a new leader is arriving, changing the behaviors because he's convinced, he's passionate. But at some point, this is what you said, that culture is really true when the leader is not in the room. Then how do you make sure that there is a commitment, afterwards?
Yeah, and it's a great question again. And you gave yourself the answer, the consistency, right? How consistent are you in your interactions? And I think just if you understand how human change works, we have big autobahns in our brain, the neural structures of all of our past behavior, right? Those are very much reinforced. We've done that so many times. So it's kind of naive to think that just because we had one big bang thing, all of that is rewired. That's not how it works, right? We're going to have to intentionally choose to behave differently in different situations. Sometimes it will succeed, sometimes it will fail. And then we need those reflective moments to say, has it worked? Has it not worked? Right? Have we improved? What do we need to, right? How do we need to evolve further? So the consistency means translating that into a series of interactions, and they don't have to be always 3-day offsites, but even like a short retrospective, every 6 weeks to say, hey, we committed to certain behaviors. What has happened? Have we done it? Have we not done it? To what extent? You get feedback points from the broader organization in those kind of things. That's where the consistency is created. I would argue, though, without a clear business vision, usually there is not enough energy for this, right? So the cultural piece must connect to we want to achieve certain things. And for that, we want to act in a certain way. And this requires a certain mindset and belief. And then if you put the rhythm behind it, where you look at both the business outcomes and you look at the behaviors, then usually you see progress quite quickly.
We very often think it's mindset, behavior, but there is a system orchestrating or operationalizing it.
Yes.
Could you tell us what are the 2, 3, or 4 major points on what is a cultural system per se?
And again, you are really looking at it from a CEO perspective, and the system is exactly what captures it. Intention isn't enough, right? You have to have a system behind it, just like you would orchestrate a business transformation, right? And often the cultural transformation must be directly linked to the business transformation. You wouldn't just do that with an intention. Usually you have a program behind it.
Yes.
You have some activity behind it. So when you look at this from a cultural evolution point of view, there are a few key elements. There is the senior leadership team that must be absolutely aligned, committed, and in their behavior, role modeling the change. And then you have them responsible for cascading with their teams and replicating those kind of conversations, right? This is super necessary. Often it falls down that you have a senior leadership team committed, and then the lower levels don't even understand what these guys are talking about. Literally, you ask them and they have no clue. Right? There is no connection. So replicating dialogues like that through the leadership levels is super key, and having a level of consistency, that's one element. The second one, which is completely underestimated often, is who do you appoint and who do you promote, right?
Yes,
so if you want to have a certain change, shift, and you keep all of the leaders in place who are basically blocking that, You have a problem, right?
Yeah.
You need to make sure that you have a critical mass of leaders who understand that and who can then support. That would be the second one. The third one is often the incentive piece, looking at incentives. So for example, many companies now want to move more to collaboration across end-to-end kind of, different functions. But then the incentives are completely just, what have I done for my unit, right?
But I will just then interrupt you on this one, because there is the question over and over that I've seen done a lot of different ways. On the incentive, do you incentivize on performance and behaviors, or behaviors is just a way to promote or not people? Are you just putting some of the money into the behavior that you want to see? And from the experience, what have you seen the most efficient?
I've seen different approaches, but I would say if you ignore the behavior, you're always in trouble. Whether you need to really put an incentive to the behavior, or whether it's part of your overarching performance evaluation, where the leader is mature enough to say, I will always look at both, whether you formally need to incentivize behaviors or not, that's a different question. And whether you need an elaborate system, but you need to have the clear agreement that people can't get away with shitty behavior,
that you behavior should be assessed in a formalized way.
Exactly.
Then last question I would have then on your side, you are meeting a lot of different people in what you do. And if there would be one person you would love to take a coffee with and, having those kind of conversation, whatever in the world, past or present, who would that be?
That's another really great question. And I'll actually go with a contemporary person.
Okay.
Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister. Why? Because what I really admire about him is how quick he was able to embrace a reality that was rapidly shifting and quite threatening for Canada.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, the tariffs, everything basically destroyed the entire business model of the country, right? In a way. So it was a super difficult scenario. He was very fast to understand what was going on. No denial, no delusion, right? I mean, his speech at the World Economic Forum, he said, this is a rupture. This is not a transition. And then I love his sentence, nostalgia isn't a strategy.
Yes.
You have to respond. And he was so fast from his point of responsibility to build a plan and build a strategy that Canada is even growing, is experiencing GDP growth in this whole environment as a sequence of all the measures that he put in place very quickly. I think that's the kind of issue I would like to understand from him. How was he able to, mentally get to this point so fast and emotionally, and then also he's not aggressive in this, right? When he speaks, he never attacks people. He doesn't attack those who attack him.
But he's clear.
He's funny. He's clear, right? He's a little bit of irony, but there is never this abrasiveness. So also he doesn't damage people. He's able to make all the right calls and not all the.
This
right
has
calls.
been
I'm
one
sure
of the speeches the most recognized in Davos.
That's for a reason. Yeah.
And maybe to close on a book, a recommendation, because we talked a lot about the I dimension, about how as leader we can know ourselves better to be able to support people better. Any book you would recommend to the people listening on that I dimension? I think you were talking, and one word that I took also from our conversation is being conscious. And it's and I like one of the book that I recommend once was Conscious Business, Creating Value Through Values from Fred Kaufman, that has been one of the foundation of the work we have done here in Stroman on our cultural journey. Another one that could help people to face reality, but on the I dimension side.
On the I dimension specifically?
Yes.
Yeah. There's one I would recommend. It's not a leadership book. It's really more of a self, exploration book, but it's very powerful. It's called No Bad Parts by Richard Schwartz. Okay. He's a psychotherapist. Okay. And it's a very easy introduction to understanding the different parts inside of yourself and working with them more consciously, right? More your adult part versus your defensive parts, those kind of things. So that's probably an easy introduction to the I dimension on a deeper level.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Joachim. That was really a pleasure. A lot of deep conversation, a lot to take for all of us and for me personally. That's why I try to reframe some of it, because it's so packed about a lot of very interesting concept and especially also tools. And I hope that you have appreciated that session. A lot, obviously, on leader to take from then the capability to challenge ourselves before challenging the people, and being able to understand how to structure also a cultural change program, and where it's very often failed, but also where it takes a lot of its power. Thanks a lot. And if you have liked this session, you can share it and appreciate it with all your colleagues, and looking forward to the next session. Thank you.